Hey guys, so this month's new tutorial is going to be covering Megascans and how to use it to build a little simple environment for a scene. As some of you guys might have heard, Megascans recently announced their 10,000th asset that they've made, and in doing so, they actually provided a big discount. So all future and old assets are now way cheaper. And when I mean way cheaper, I mean you can get nice models that used to be 12 points for 4 points, and they also gave all new members and existing members 100 free points. So really cool on their part to lower their prices so that it becomes more accessible to everybody. And so I figured, this is the good time to bring in some of this stuff and cover different little techniques and workflows using Megascans. So this is our brand new scene. We're going to start this from scratch. We're going to just drop down a grid just to kind of get something going. We're going to drop down a Redshift ROP. And just so you guys know, I'm using Redshift 3.08. So some things have been improved and added since then that are really useful, including the new AOV ROP. So if you drop this down, this lets you just kind of save your own AOVs that you use all the time. So I already have a couple set up, and bam, just like that, I have my usual AOVs loaded up. And all you got to do is come into your output, and under AOV, just point it to the AOV ROP you're using. And that way you don't have to fill these out every time. You just kind of save a preset using the Houdini preset system, and you kind of just come in here and load them up as needed. So cool. And let's get some GI going, some brute force. Let's also drop down a camera object, and let's drop down a camera. We'll look through the camera, lock it. Cool. And we'll make some adjustments later in terms of resolution. We'll just keep it like this, 720p, just for faster IPR. A typical landscape or wider photography of environments, you usually use shorter focal length. We're going to do something like 35, typical film millimeter length. You might even go shorter, but let's go with 35. Let's drop down a Redshift Sun. So we'll just click here. Let's rotate that around. And we could use the Redshift height fields, or not the Redshift, the Houdini height field system to kind of get some shapes going. But for now, I think we're going to just keep it simple. So let's just jump in here. We're going to increase our size. Let's just do 100. So that's 100 meters. For rows and columns, let's just do 50, 50. So that gives us a little bit of resolution here. Maybe we'll do 100, 100. And let's drop down a mountain sop. And that'll just kind of give us a little bit of variation in our surface, so it's not perfectly smooth. And let's add a Redshift tag on here. So let's add some tessellation. We'll use world space, so disable screen space. And our maximum subdivisions, let's just do 1. I only want to subdivide it so it's a little bit smoother. And I think that should be okay. So let's come over here to our sun. Let's just move that up so it's a little easier to see and increase our icon scale. So right now it's just kind of pointed downward, nothing particularly fancy. Sun's coming from over here. And yeah, I think this could be a good little start. Let's drop down one of our redshift materials. So let's drag this in. And all this is just a generic plain redshift material with a little bit of roughness, so nothing special. But just so that way I don't have to go and hit tab and write it out myself, I just drag it down. And I'll be sharing this with you guys pretty soon. It's almost ready. I just need to go in and edit a couple particular things in some of the naming convention and stuff. But overall, it's almost ready. There's quite a lot of materials here. They're all procedural, simple. They're just starting points. So different metals, plastics, minerals, glass, gems. And I tried to look up all the IOR values and all that stuff to make it, look good. So you guys, all my patrons will get this pretty soon to test out. And if everything goes well, I'll be sharing it publicly after I get some feedback and stuff. And I might expand it further. I'm hoping that the new OSL and shader customization support arrives soon for 3.0, because that would let me add way more cool stuff in here. So once that happens, I might have to re-release this, but I don't know, how far off that is still. So anyways, cool. We've got our basic scene. Let's open up the render view. Let's just see what we've got. And actually it's using bucket mode, which is kind of weird. So let's jump back in here to our out and make sure render view. Yep, render view. Huh. Okay, that's kind of weird. Should be using progressive. Okay, now it's using progressive. I don't know. That's kind of strange. Okay. And actually, let's reduce our scale here. So let's do 100. So it's a little smaller. And neat. Okay, so we've got our scene. We've got our sky. And if you guys aren't aware, there's two sky models in Redshift. The HOSIC, which is this sky model. And in the 3.0 builds, it automatically uses HOSIC. But if you're still using 2.6, you need to come into your light and actually go under the environment shader and model, switch that to HOSIC. HOSIC is, in my opinion, better looking. Prethem's older, so it kind of gives things a little more of a purple glow. There's another model called Nishida, which is better for atmospheres and high altitudes. And I'm hoping that when OSL support arrives, we'll be able to load up our own Nishida model into here. But for now, remember to switch to HOSIC. This is the more accurate and newer sky model. All right. So here we go. Got our starting point. And so we're going to load in some stuff now. Let's just pause this. Now that we've got kind of a basic scene already set up. And we're going to come over here to Megascans. So this is the Quixel Bridge. And if you guys don't have Megascans yet, they have some free stuff you guys can play around with. It's nothing too crazy, but there's some shapes and stuff to get you going. And we're going to switch over to using these assets here. And so the way Megascans works is you need to install the plugin, and it'll actually do it automatically for you the first time you let's say you want to export this. The export button you click on this and it'll export to Houdini. Right now it's not connected because I haven't opened the other end on here, but when you click this, it'll tell you, oh, do you want to install the Houdini plugin, yada yada yada, under the export settings here. you could switch to different tools. So, you know, there's Cinema 4D, and you click the download plugin. I don't use Cinema 4D, so that's not an option for me. And the plugin, if it needs an update, it'll tell you, oh, there's a new version of the Houdini Live Link, and it'll update for you. So you don't really have to do much. Sometimes this will break your environment variables, updating this. So that's why you should use the packages system, if you guys haven't seen that packages tutorial. And that way, this will update your environment variable, and along with the Houdini game dev tools, stuff like that, while your renderers like RenderMan, Redshift, and whatnot, you'll update using the packages system. And that way the environment variables don't get mixed up. So that's why I recommend doing that. So anyways, we're going to load something in. So let's load in a ground texture. This looks like a nice little, we'll start out with this. And so in order to bring in this asset, you need to come up here into Houdini, and once you have it installed, you'll get this new tab up here. And this is, you know, the Quixel Megascans Live Link. And there's a settings section. Now you need to make sure how you want to set this up, and for what renderer, stuff like that, the LOD level for Physics Painter, use EXR displacement. And so when you click Megascans Live Link, you'll get this. And this will tell you the version of the Live Link you're using, the render engine which you're importing for. So we're going to use Redshift, so click Redshift. The workflow, so Redshift textures or triplanar. We're going to be using, could use triplanar also, or textures. Well, I'll show you how to use both. So, and then there's the apply material to selection or not. So we're going to have our grid selected here. And now with our Live Link open, you click export, and it's going to say it's connecting to Houdini and exporting. And now there wasn't any errors or anything. And whatever settings you have here, the texture resolution, the kind of texture format you want to use, it'll all just go through. So let's move out of the way. Let's go to matte. And oh, there we go. It's barely finished, so it said exported successfully. And it might be a little slow depending on where your assets are. My assets are on a NAS drive on the network, so it can take a little while to process them and then send them back and forth. So this should be okay now. Let's jump back out. And it doesn't look like our material. Oh, there. Yeah, it's just on top of it, so made it a little confusing. And it should be selected on our object. So if we come in here, we'll have everything already plugged in and ready to go. Now you guys could add the extra bump map or normal map strength if you want by plugging it in. That's up to you. And inside of this green node, you'll have options for tiling, rotating, etc. And if you dive in here, this HDA includes all the connected assets. So you've got the ambient occlusion, etc., that comes out and then goes into this sub output, and that will plug in here. So if I want ambient occlusion, you need to make sure to have this wired into your overall opacity, overall color, and that'll just give us a little bit of ambient occlusion on top. And if we want normals, we need to connect this into our bump input. But let's see what we get already, you know, kind of just see what it's looking like. So let's hit IPR. And since this is using displacement, we do need the tessellation and displacement activated. So it does look like something's going on. Alright, I'm back, and I did re-download them. I checked to make sure that they're good. And actually, I just realized what the problem really was this is a simple mistake. It's that I forgot to add UVs. And the grid doesn't come with UVs. I always forget to do this. Little mistakes like this, but they happened. Okay, there we go. And let's initialize that. Now we have UVs. Now the texture should project correctly, and our displacement should work. So let's try this again. And there we go. Okay. So yeah, see guys, you know, little things like that will catch you up. So grids never come in with any UVs. In fact, most stuff in Houdini doesn't have UVs, so I always forget those things. Sorry about that, guys. So, all right, let's hit the IPR now. Let's zoom out. This is, you know, looks pretty good actually already. Can maybe get a little stronger displacement. Jump up to our object. And let's just crank this up a little bit more. Just see what happens if we hit it up to 1, which is a lot. And due to our scale, you know, that matters also. Displacement takes into account your object scale, your scene scale, so all those things you need to account for. So let's come in here, go under our displacement, and let's do a maximum displacement of 4. So we can displace a little higher. And our maximum subdivisions, I think 4 is enough. Let's keep this at 1. Let's do 10. Since this is 100 meters, it's a massive plane. So let's come in here. Let's increase this to 5. There we go. So that gives us a little stronger displacement here. Maybe we could do a little more. Let's try 8. That looks nicer. Let's repeat this. So let's scale this 3 times in each axis. That might be too much. Let's do 2. Okay, cool. So we've got some leaves and some different stuff going on here. Let's zoom in a little. Got some displacement going on the moss. You know, not bad. We might repeat this even further. Let's do let's do 3. And I think we could bring in some objects now. So let's pause this. And let's bring in a hero object. So let's find something interesting here. And we'll blend some materials a little bit later, but let's kind of get the layout going. So let's scatter some of these little plants around, maybe. Actually, let's use this hero rock. This looks cool. So let's export it. Make sure our Houdini live link is still open for Megascans. We'll give this a minute to process. So I'll pause this while it does its processing. And it finished processing, and it created this subgroup here. So if we look around, we should have our object somewhere around here, but not seeing it. It's looking invisible, which is kind of weird. Huh. Looks like it didn't even load it in. Since it's empty. That's kind of strange. And let's, instead of use an oh, actually, FBX is the only option. Huh. LOD 0. Let's just do high poly instead of use any LOD. So let's delete this. Since this is going to be probably our hero asset, I want to keep this full res. So let's move that out of the way. And there we go. For some reason, LOD 0 was blank. So I'm guessing it didn't contain an LOD 0. So let's turn back on our grid. Let's jump in here. Get our rock asset. And let's scale this. And we'll bring this down a little bit so that it kind of blends in with the terrain. Alright, so we gotta lay it out a little, and we might just duplicate this, you know, why not, to kind of art direct it ourselves. And I'm not sure how heavy in polygons this is. Let's come in here. Oh, it's pretty heavy, so 2 million. Not crazy heavy, but, you know, relatively heavy. So it might be better if we use instances, but we'll see, to keep things a little lighter. And as a matter of fact, I think I'm going to do that. So let's just keep things light. So let's load up a packed primitive. Or actually, no, let's disable that. Let's just do it manually in here. So we're going to do a copy, transform, And we'll just pack and instance this. Scoot that over. Let's display this as a bounding box. Well, no, we'll keep it full geometry for now, so we can see how we're laying this out. Let's shrink the scale. So maybe something like that. And let's jump back out. Let's make sure under our Redshift tab, under instancing, we choose instance top level packed primitives. That way it'll instance everything. And let's hit render and just see what we get. Where we're at with this. So this might take a little second to first process the geometry for the first time and the textures. And while that's going, let's look around for some new stuff to scatter. So maybe some plants. We'll try to scatter some of these two little plants maybe. And we've got some other rocks that are part of the Icelandic pack. So I think we'll combine those with some of these plants here. Okay, we've got to start. Our shadows are a little too harsh, so we're gonna have to soften that up a little. But you know, we're getting there. So let's jump into our sun. Come up here to the sun shader section, and we're going to increase the softness to something like 10. That'll just give us a little bit of a lighter amount. And on our mount, I'm going to reduce our mountain sop. It's a little strong. So let's come over here. Let's do half that height. Let's move around. Kind of see what we got. And I think we'll scatter some rocks using the physics painter, since some people have asked about that too and how that works with Houdini and Megascan, so we'll use that. Oops. Okay, it's a nice little start here. Displacement might be a little too strong too, so we'll reduce that. Let's go with something like 5. And I'm not seeing the material for that rock. Oh, actually, no, it's in the rock itself here. And I think that's using displacement. Yeah, so we probably don't need to use displacement for this, but we'll see. 'Cause it's probably activated right now. Yeah. So since it's already pretty high poly, I don't think we'll need it so much, and that's probably what's delaying our processing time. So let's reduce that to 1 subdivision, and let's see if that sped up things a little. And actually we should use world space instead of screen space. Since that screen space, how it works is the size and resolution of your render, it'll subdivide further and further the closer an object is to the camera, rather than just being consistent. So that could take a little longer. So actually, and yeah, even just lowering our subdivisions, the quality is pretty much high. So we might not even need to just displace or do any of that. So let's see what we get if we just do that. Since it's just raw polygons. And actually I should probably use an LOD, so I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to reload the terrain object in again, and we're going to use an LOD just so we could keep things a little faster and snappy in our IPR while we're building our assembly. And yeah, as you can see, even without displacement, the detail's pretty high. So I'm going to reload that in. I'm just going to pause for a second. Alright, so here's our LOD 0, and it's a little snappier, not as detailed, but at the end we'll bring in maybe 1 object that'll be our most detailed. These might just still be side objects. We'll see. I think for our next little step, we could color correct this green or the ground green to be a little closer to each other, but I think we'll deal with that later. Let's scatter some stuff on here just to get some more exciting foliage going on the ground. So we're going to load up maybe this stuff, and actually, oops, switch over here. So maybe we'll get this kind of weed on the ground first. And we can do LOD 0 or LOD 1. Let's try 0. Let's see how high poly it is. Might be a little too many polygons, but we'll find out. And let's try 4K. We'll use JPEGs. So let's export. And it's going to say export successfully, yada yada yada. And here we go. Now we've got our pigweed. And right now it's only scattering on the grid that comes in by default. So we actually don't want to scatter on this grid. What we're going to scatter on, and let's just disable the pigweed. We're going to enable instances. And oops, actually, what I realized is it loaded inside of our rocks. So let's cut that subnet, come back up, let's paste it in here. There we go. Now let's activate that, and inside of here we've got it under instances. So you can see that it's using the usual Houdini point scatter, and it's scattering on top of this grid. So we're going to switch this grid to use our grid that we already have, which is this grid here. And now you'll notice that it's selected the larger grid area, and now we've got some points inside of there. So if we jump back out, and let's go under Redshift, our Redshift tab, and here we go. Under instancing, let's use point clouds. Point clouds are faster to process when there's a lot of geometry. So something to keep in mind. And if we zoom in here, and let's switch our lighting to basic lighting and disable our sun's influence. I think that's kind of making it a little, it's still not really visible, which is kind of weird. Okay, it's a little strange. I was hoping the direct light, the headlight, would darken it, but let's go to the matte, and we'll just change the OpenGL here. That's why it's a little too bright. Let's do that so we can see the plants a little better here. And let's jump back into our pigweed. And inside of here, there's the Quixel Simple Scatter. So this is a really neat HDA that just lets you make tons of adjustments on the way things get scattered. So you can adjust the maximum amount of points, the seed, if you want to randomize points, as you guys can see. And actually, let's jump back up and then pin our viewport so you guys can see it a little better. And let's scoot this over. And you guys can see how here's our little weeds, and the seed adjusts all this. You have rotation. Right now it's randomly rotating, which is fine on the y-axis, which is what we want. And we have p-scale and an overall scale multiplier. Right now I think we need to make these a little bigger. So let's try 3. That might be a little too big. Let's do 2. And let's increase our density here by increasing our point count. So let's try 3,000 maybe. I think that's okay. And let's just kind of see what we've got now. So let's save. Let's hit render. And we might need more or less points. We'll see. And from the looks of it, something's going wrong right here. No, oh, it's the grid. Let's jump back up here. Disable that. Or actually, we could just delete it. So let's re-render this. And so now you can see that we've got our little weeds scattered in there. And that'll just kind of help break up our terrain. And we'll scatter some on this object also. So let's actually do that next. So let's duplicate this. And we'll call this instance rock. Jump in here. And we'll switch from scattering on that to scattering on our rock. So jump in here. And we've got our asset, rock. I believe this is the one. Oh no, it's not this one. It's source. No, I guess it is that one. And actually this needs to be unpacked, the geometry to scatter on it, since these were just manually moved around and packed in instance. So we need to come up in here and dive inside of here, and either I uncheck pack an instance or I unpack it. So if you drop an unpack, now that should allow us to scatter onto the surface, and it looks like it did. Let's disable that and make sure. Yeah. So since I'm using packed prims, you got to do that. You have to unpack it. If this was just regular instances, then it would work using the instance freeze, which is down here. And this freezes the instance, but since for these bigger blocks we're not using regular instances, we're using the we're just pack primming. We're gonna just keep it that way. And let's actually just render and see what we get. And surprisingly, we're not seeing anything. Our geometry is missing. That is weird. Let's bypass this and let's disable. Oh, I know why. The object level redshift is still thinking that it's packed, so we need to disable that, and that should fix that. Let's move up. Give it a second to process. And okay, now we've got some of those little weeds kind of scattered on top. Okay, so now we can adjust that. So let's keep our maximum subdivisions a little lower. Let's do 4. I think 4 is enough. Actually, let's disable screen space. That'll also speed that up because we got closer to the rock, so the detail got higher. So let's do 6. Let's keep it at 6, but do screen space. And let's jump in here. Let's increase now our scatter on top of our rocks. So maybe something like that. Oh, that's a little too many. Let's pin. Let's try 400. And let's decrease the scale on these to be 1. And we're going to bias the direction to the normals of the object. So see how it kind of rotates them? Since we want it to follow the rotation of the rocks. And here we have options for slope, height, and noise. And the type of noise you could use: alligator noise, noise distribution, the roughness, the frequency. Tons of options here. I think we'll try that. Something like that. Let's do a distribution of 600. Let's hit render. Let's actually save. And now I don't see them. So it looks like they're inside of our mesh. So we might need to offset them a little. Let's increase the scale. Let's try 2 again. So now they're a little further outside. Let's increase the P scale max. Let's just do it to 2. So we get an occasional pretty big one. Let's hit render again. And this looks a little better. Nice clumping and distribution. Okay, cool. So now things are starting to slowly come together, as you guys can see. We're getting a little variation on our rocks. We're getting some variation on the ground. So let's bring in another... And you know, we haven't even gotten to talk about post effects or, you know, any of this stuff. We'll deal with this later. You know, the bokeh and bloom, glare, and all that. We'll mess with this at like once our layout's a little better figured out. Right now, we're still kind of figuring out our layout. So let's come up to the top, and let's load in a different kind of plant. Let's try these. These look cool. So let's hit export. Give it a second. And if we move over, here we go. They're right here. Let's jump in. Let's get rid of our grid. Let's make sure that we're using point clouds. They're faster in Houdini. Let's jump into our instance. Change our source to be our grid object. Here we go. Now you can see that we've got a couple more of those laid out. And let's actually duplicate that again. And we're going to put these on our rock. Let's come up here. Oops. They need to be, there we go. And that's way too many. So let's do something like 100. We'll offset the angle a little bit. Let's do less, more like 50. And let's just see what we get. And again, we'll save our scene. And we might just mask them to only be on the top layer of our rocks here. Well, no, this is okay. Cool. Let's maybe bring in a couple of these rocks now, and we'll scatter these also. So let's load those in. Bring these to the side, jump in. Get rid of the grid. We'll instance. There we go. They're laid out everywhere. And I think we'll offset these a bit. And also not do as many. Let's do maybe 50. And actually we could paint these. If we paint the density attribute down on our plane. So I might show you guys how to do that next. Since that's actually a pretty good idea. Instead of using just a random noise distribution. So yeah, I think we'll try that. Let's come in here and let's transform things down just a little bit. Actually, we don't even need to use that. We'll just come back up here and transform our instances. Oops. That looks like it's just changing the seed, which is weird. There we go. So we'll lower this just a bit. Something like that. And let's hit render and see what we get. And let's save our scene. And of course, every time I bring in a new object, it's got to re-cache out the texture, so it takes a little bit the first time to render. Okay, yeah, things are starting to slowly come together. We've got our smaller rocks. We've got our texture on our ground. We've got our bigger rocks. We got some plants scattered on things. And I think a good idea, actually, let's drop down oops, a sphere. Let's cut that out, paste that down here. Polygon mesh. Let's duplicate this. Oops. Let's slide this over. It's parent. Actually, let's no, yeah. Parent this. No, we'll just leave them like that for now. And let's just so we can move on. We're going to use our redshift material here. Drop that on 1. Let's make another one, or let's make a chrome. So let's look for a metal. Chrome. We'll drop that down there. And I'll make sure this is almost white. Just so we could get a good sense of our color values and strengths. Let's jump back up here. And I'm getting an error. Oh, and yeah, see, this is one of the things that I need to fix before I release my mats for you guys. There's still some weird OpenGL issues, so I gotta fix those things. But anyways, let's move this. Huh. Usually you can move both objects at once, but it's not letting me. And it might be due to that error. And as a matter of fact, I might as well come in here and fix that right now. So this has to say Chrome. And aluminum. Yep, that's the problem. And actually what would work better is if I just drop down material. We'll copy this. We'll call it that. Paste that name here. And I'll have to resave this. But yeah, there's a couple of these materials that I gotta fix, like this one, for you guys, before I share the material pack. That have some bugs. Okay, cool. And yeah, that's a nice little. It's a start. So let's maybe adjust our sun angle. Maybe get some bigger shadows. And that's weird. Nothing's updating for some reason. I think that OpenGL issue just really messed up the IPR. Yeah, because even the sun's not updating. Oh, actually, no, that's a translate. Oops. There we go. So we can get some interesting shadows. And at this point is where you would come in here into the post effects and increase your f-stops so that the scene gets a little brighter. So we could try 7, 6. And we could use a white point and pick our white point from our sky. And shift it a little if we want it to be a little warmer or neutral. I'll make it a little warmer. Something like that. Let's do a vignette of 3. I think we're fine on Black Crush, etc., etc. Our bloom, I think, is okay. Everything else is okay. We'll deal with bokeh and stuff later. And I might switch to OCIO like Blender, not Blender, Filmic. But I'm undecided on that yet. But okay, cool. So here we've got our basic scene already, and it's, you know, we got some nice shadows. Things are starting to kind of come together. So we'll just start to build up more assets being scattered on here, and we're going to start to mix and blend different materials on our ground next. Hey guys, so I'm back. I ended up loading up just the Filmic base configuration, nothing particularly fancy, and it looks a little more desaturated, a little more photographic, so we're going to use that. And here's what we've got so far. Some pretty interesting results. And yeah, you know, this is our current camera view, so I'm going to keep this as a separate camera. But if we let's see, switch this over to perspective, we look around and rotate around our scene. We've got some pretty cool light effects going on. I might make these other rocks a little bit smaller later, but we're going to scatter some more stuff in here. So let's move on to doing that next. So let's pause this. And let's come up here into our Megascans assets again. And let's bring in the Great Brome, I guess, whatever whatever this is, and let's export this. So we'll give this a second to load. Here we go. And I think we'll scatter a lot more of these assets this time around. So let's switch that over. Bring up our grid down here. Let's get rid of this grid. Let's dive in here and let's switch our seed around just so it's a little different. And let's pin our viewport so we can see the plants moving around. And for our count, let's do something a lot higher. Let's do like 4,000. Maybe even more. Let's do 10,000. Okay, you know, I think this is a good amount. And we've got some variation going on. Maybe they're a little too tall, so I might shrink these down a little. Let's try 0.7. And let's try this. Let's just see what we've got. And I might end up switching over to RT core mode because we're starting to get to that point where there's a lot of little instance geometry, and so RTX tends to accelerate these kinds of scenes basically. So we'll let that load up, and I'm not seeing them in here, so let's jump back out. Make sure that we've got instancing. Let's switch over to point clouds. They're a little faster. Yeah, it should be visible. Oops, move the camera. Let's reload again. Maybe they are there. I just, it's hard to see them. Oh yeah, they are. They're right here. So I'm going to increase the size. I guess I shrank them too much. So let's come back in here. Let's set this at 1. Let's just do 1.5. The displacement might be also what's kind of changing things. And there's actually an option in here to switch our display source so that it follows the ground displacement. So I think I'll do that in a second, but I first want to check the scale. Okay, I think this is a little better. They're a little more obvious now. So let's turn on, inside of your simple scatter, there's an option called display source. So you activate this, and it'll ask you for a texture map to load in here. And you could load in your texture map. So we know that our terrain is using this displacement here. So let's dive in here. Specular, transmission, roughness, spec, normal, normal, metal, mask. I think they're alphabetical. Here we go. Displace. And actually, it'll show up here as our displacement EXR. So we're just going to copy the location, jump back out, and let's move our grass up this way. I'm going to probably put all these into their own subnet soon just to kind of organize things a little. But I won't bother showing you guys that on camera. It's kind of a waste of time. So let's paste in here. Let's click that. Look for our displacement. Here it is. Our scale, we need to keep the scale the same. And actually, let's quick mark this so we can just quickly jump back in. And we'll quick mark our materials. And our displacement scale is at 1. Let me make sure the terrain itself, I believe, yeah, it's at 1, and it just has a max displacement. Okay, so that should be fine. So these settings right here, you want these to match your redshift displacement settings. So the scale was 1, and the min and max remapping is -0.5, +0.5, and so it should work. So if we come in here, and let's do a little screenshot, and let's re-render. The leaves, or not the leaves, the grass should move up off the ground to match our displacement. So if we switch over, yeah, you'll see that the location's changed. To match our new displaced ground. Let's come over here, kind of. So actually, let's do this now for the rest of our objects here that are on the ground. Let's come up here, Icelandic, the pigweed, dive inside, display source, drop that in, do the same here. And yeah, let's see kind of what we got. And we could add some more variation to our shaders actually using an attribute. Let's compare this here. Yeah, so they got lifted. You can see that this one before was kind of underground, and now they're kind of up, correctly matching the displacement, so that's good. I think we could scatter a little bit more of this grass here. So let's come in here. Scatter. Let's try 15,000. I think that's a little more. Since I want that to be like our regular grass, our most common grass all over our surface. Cool. So this is starting to come together. And I mean, the render speed's still really great. Alright. Now, let's say we want to add variation to some of this grass. Right now it's all pretty similar. There's an option for this, which is really great. So inside of your simple scatter, there's this last tab called attribute. Now, if we check our geometry spreadsheet, you'll see that these are all the attributes that we have so far used. So you have like normal, direction, the orientation. You know, you can see that it's randomizing on the y-axis. The scale, how it's randomly going across the scales, and our displacement here, and our up direction. So what this does is it creates a new random attribute. So if we turn this on, you'll see that it created QRND. So you could think of this, I think the Q is for Quixel, so it's Quixel random. And you could slide the seed to change the seed of the random numbers, and then the point attribute size. So this right now is only creating numbers between 0 and 1. Right? So if you change this to 5, it's going to now make numbers between 0 and 5. So let's make this 0 and 3. So how Redshift works is if you use this as user data, it'll round to the nearest full number. So if it's 0.3, it's going to just say the number 0. And since this creates float attributes instead of integers, that's fine though. And so how we're going to use this is we're going to use a shader switch. So you got to just remember QRND. So let's come back up here. Let's go inside of our material. And so we've got this material here. And it's going into the sprite shader, doing its thing. And what we want to do is we're going to edit the diffuse color. So if we come up here, you'll notice we've got our diffuse color here. So to do this, we're going to use the user data. And you could use actually integer, and it'll read these in as full numbers. And so we're going to use that. That should work. We'll see right now, but let's try it out. So QRND, that's the attribute we're reading. and the default value is 0. And we're going to use a switch, so an RS shader switch, and this lets you plug in different things based on this user data that randomly is going to give us these numbers, and then it's going to switch between these. So what we're going to do next is we're going to plug this in as a selector, and that's going to tell it which of these random values to plug in. So let's move this. Let's actually move this a lot further so we have more room, and let's split this with a point. And let's move this upwards. And so what we're going to do is we're going to color correct our texture map. How many? We got 0 to 3. So there's 4 inputs. So we need color correct. We're going to need 4 of these. 1, 2. Let's move this up. 3, 4. And so what's neat about this, and let's scoot this over even more, is this is going to let us randomize using this built-in attribute. So you don't even have to make the attributes yourselves, guys. Like this HDA makes everything way, way easier. So let's scoot this over. Let's keep plugging these in. All right, cool. And actually, you know what? We'll use 3. 1 will just be the original. So we're going to plug that into 3 here. Let's bring it down a dot. So now we have these other inputs. So the original is going to go into number 3. This one's going to go into 2. This one's going to go into 1. And let's just scoot this over here. And this is going to go into 0. So with these, we can now color correct. And then we'll plug this back into our diffuse. And so what's happening is our texture map is going to go in and randomly get selected by that attribute, the QRND. And then it's going to pick one of these 4 inputs randomly and then pass it to our diffuse color. And so using that, we could color correct these. So let's just make some wild color correction. Hey guys, so it looks like I stumbled upon a bug with the Megascans HDA and the Redshift shader switch. So I just reported it. Hopefully Wango will get on it and he'll figure out what's wrong. It's just something going on with the HDA where if you input this into a shader switch, it's not detecting it like it should, and it just gives us a white input. So this shader switch bug, we'll get around it right now, but just to show you guys what's going on. So here we've got our integer, like I mentioned earlier, and we have our QRND, so it's making numbers between 0 and 3, and it's going to round to the nearest full number. And so when we render this, you could see that it's switching between these colors that I have right here. So I have red, green, blue, and pink. And so it's randomly selecting these. Now, you can further adjust this attribute to give it certain ratios of randomness, so that 50% is green and 10% is pink or whatever. We could do that also. But to fix this, though, regarding the texture, it's not letting me just pull the texture out and then color correct it and then plug it back in to our shader switch. I'm not sure what's going on. So it's a bug, because that same input will work on the RS material. So there's definitely something bugged between the shader switch and the Megascans HDA. So what you could do to get around this is come in here and you'll see that we have the albedo texture. So we'll just copy this, or you can select it up here, the albedo, and we're going to just drop down the redshift texture. We'll paste that in here, and we're going to make 4. Well, actually, we don't need 4 of them. We only need 1, and then we just need to color correct this 4 times, or 3 times, since one of them will just be regular. And so if we do this, plug in here, let's move this up, and let's cut these colored ones for now. We'll use these to adjust our ratios later, and I'll show you guys how to do that manually with the attribute. Since the built-in attribute, the QRND, is just completely random, so it doesn't let you control the percentages, but I'll show you guys how to do that. So if we plug this in here, plug this in here, plug this in here, and then the bottom one will just be regular. Let's just drag that down. If we tried to do this earlier, like I had it set up earlier, where this connected to the color corrections, it would give us a white texture. I don't know why. Like I said, that's a bug. So hopefully, you know, either the Redshift or Megascans guys will fix that, and I got to report it to the Quixel team. But the workaround for now is just load in the diffuse texture here separately. And so now that we've got this, we could color correct this. So let's just shift these a little around, and so if we hit play, there you go. So we've got our texture, and it's getting some variation in color. Cool. And we've got our regular texture and our variation version. And so let's see which output this is here. So let's shift this around. So this looks like it's making the values a little yellower. If we go to 0, it's yellow. If we slide it over here, it's going to be more blue. So let's do something in between. A little more bluish. We'll desaturate, or actually let's make it more yellow. So if we go over here, these are the reds. So let's go somewhere over here, a little more yellow. We'll desaturate it a bit and darken it. And let's switch over to this one. And let's slide this around. And so that's what this one's changing. We'll make this a little more browner. And we'll drop our level even more, so they're darker. And let's desaturate it even further. So that's these colors right here. And then our final one, let's keep this green, so it's a little more intense of a green. Let's zoom out here. So you guys can see how we've got some variation now. And let's desaturate this a little bit and darken it. Cool. So now we've got different variations of our color. And maybe let's shift it a little more into the yellow. And you know, that's not bad. And actually this ratio looks okay, but let's say we wanted to adjust this ourselves, right? So how can we do that? So let's pause this. Several ways we could do this. The easiest way is to come in here into our instances and disable this. So it's going to get rid of Q R&D. Let's just copy this though and make a new random attribute. So drop down an attribute randomize, and we'll give it the same name since our user data is already loading that. Loading that name in. So for the attribute name, we're going to use the same name, and you'll see that it made it again. Where'd it go? Here it is. QRND. Right now it's making a vector, and we don't need a vector. What we're going to switch over to control the percentages is custom discrete. And right now it's going to only make zeros because that's what we have it set to. And we only need 3 inputs. Actually, no. Was it 4? It was 4. It was 0, 1, 2, and then the regular one. So the regular one was our last one. So this needs to be a value of 3. This needs to be a value of 2. This is a value of 1. And so the weight, this lets you control the percentage. Right? And so what's cool is right now they're all equal. So we want our regular green texture, we're going to make that 70% of the time. So 0.7. Our yellow one, we're going to make this 10% of the time. So 0.1. And then these two, actually no, we'll make this 5. 5% of the time. We'll make this 10% of the time. And we'll make this 15% of the time. And so that's going to add up all to 1, which is, you know, the full 100%. And so if we look at our QRND, you'll notice that it's generating different numbers. 3s mostly, because that's what we want 70% of the time. A couple of zeros, and so on. So now if we hit render, most of our grass is going to pick up our grass texture. And some of the grass is going to be the new green color, and some of the grass is going to be that brownish color down here, less often. So cool. And that's one way you guys could manually create the attribute here and control the percentages. And if you don't really care, then you could just use this one, and it's completely random. That's up to you guys. So cool. Now we've got, we just learned how to use attributes to randomize our shader, how to make our own custom attribute to randomize our shader percentages. And now we've got some stuff scattered, and it's starting to come together. You know, we've got some nice variations on the surface and stuff. So I think our next step is to talk about atlases. And I think actually I'll bring in some flowers just to add some color. So let's switch over here to Mega Scans. I think a couple of these little flowers with the blue on top would look nice. So we're going to export this. And actually I should have done that. Oh, okay. Came in at the top level. That's good. Scoot this over. And let's switch back over to scene view. This might start getting a little heavy in your viewport, so something to keep in mind. So far, it's not too bad, but it might start getting there. So let's jump in here. Let's delete our grid. Do the usual select a new object. I'm going to do our grid object. Let's jump up, pin our viewport so we can see it. Let's come in here. Let's add our display source. So here's our displacement. And I think we don't really need an attribute. I think that the color's okay. We won't randomize that. We might randomize the scale a little more. Let's try actually no, I think that's an okay scale. Let's increase the density. Let's try 400. And let's hit render. And if it looks okay, I'll move on to showing you guys how to use atlases in Houdini. And then after that, I think we'll talk about mixing the material using the Quixel material mixer. And then we'll wrap everything up with wind and manually painting in asset positions. So using the density attribute to paint in spots. So let's zoom in here. We've got our little flowers. They're a little small. They're there, but they're small. So let's actually increase the size on these. Let's try 2. Well, that's too big. So maybe 1.4. And also, let's jump up a level. Make sure we're using, the Redshift point cloud, so that's faster. Let's save again. And yeah, they're in there, but there's just not a lot of them. So let's come in here and maybe make them a little bigger and increase our scatter count. Let's just try 1,000. And yeah, they're around. And as I add more stuff, maybe we'll do less grass and we'll kind of switch it up. And also, I think we should talk about Physics Painter. Probably drop some rocks on here and let them roll. So we'll do that too. So okay, let's move on to atlases.